Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us Jonathan Rivera with the Podcast Factory. Welcome to the program, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me on the show. Excited to be here.
Hey, cool. So the Podcast Factory, obviously factory gives you the connotation of work and hard work and sweat and getting stuff done, and obviously podcast. So give us an overview of what the Podcast Factory does.
That is so interesting. I'm glad that you put it that way because all we do is work around the factory. But yeah, that's it. It happened by mistake. I was really just hanging out with my mentors, and more of them wanted to get podcast shows together, and I greedily jumped at the opportunity to talk with these folks as often as possible, and it turned into a business. And now we've got 15 shows that we're working on. We're helping leaders share their ideas with the world, and so I'm just fortunate to be a part of it, and I feel really happy that I'm where I am right now.
You know, and I think that's an interesting lead-in because you were doing something and then something else became apparent. Well, one thing you were doing is you were getting advice from a mentor. So first I want to acknowledge that you made an overture and asked advice from mentors. So let's speak real quick on how important is that and why should someone look for a mentor, and then how do you go about finding them?
Great question. And I have been blessed, Mike. All of my life I've had mentors, and I've got my earliest memories of being a little kid going to visit my uncle who was an electrician in Staten Island, New York. I would love to go visit him, and I couldn't figure out why do I love visiting this guy so much. And I had my little niece here, little 6-year-old girl here the other day, along with my brother and all these people, and they were getting restless, and all of a sudden I gave her some work to do. I'm just like, come on, let's go to the yard. And I gave her a bag and told her to pick up leaves. And all of a sudden this girl just got so happy. She lit up and she started doing work. And when she was done with that, she wanted to do more. So I said, all right, let's pull some weeds. And she was just the most excited. And so what I figured out was I loved visiting my uncle because he would give me little projects to do. And it made me feel like I had a purpose. I was useful. And so that's where I started in mentorship. And every stage of the game, when I was an electrician working in the hot Florida sun, I always found a mentor. I had a couple journeymen that mentored me, helped me bend pipe and pull wire and do all kinds of stuff. When I got into real estate, I have multiple mentors helping me with investments, helping me through transactions, helping me understand what I was doing. And even to this day in my business, I still seek out, find mentorship from the smartest people I can get a hold of. And even sometimes when I can't get a hold of them, I'll just keep bugging them till I can figure out a way to get in the door. But without a mentor, I don't think I'd have the purpose or direction that I need. And I think anybody who says they don't have mentors is just fooling themselves.
Yeah, you know, I would also say, and hopefully you would agree with this, that an element of having the mentor relationship is you see someone else doing things you aspire to do, and the fact that you see them doing it, you kind of go, well, it's possible. It's not some unreachable thing that they're doing this, whatever it is, you know, and I think that when you can get in there and go, well, all they did was, and then they found this out, and then they aligned with, hey, I could do that. And it might not be in the bigger scale that the mentors are doing, but I think that it gives some encouragement that they are showing you that it can be done.
That's right. And that's my cheat or my hack, if you will, Mike. When I want to learn how to do something or when I want to get an edge on the competition, I seek out those people who are already doing it, those people who are breaking ground way ahead of me, and I try to latch on and learn from them so I can shortcut my own success.
Well, and then once you get that kind of initial layer of foundation in from learning from the mentors, then it should become so easy for you to amplify and optimize that, because if this set of tactics and strategies are working for me that I learned from my mentor, then if I just find out the kind of like the Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, what's the 20% of what I'm currently doing that's giving me the 80% of the result that I want, and let me just focus more time and energy and money on that 20%. And again, all focus back on, I learned it from a mentor, I'm doing it for myself here, and then to kind of go from step 1 to step 5 might be way faster than if you tried to slug it out yourself.
That's right. That's the shortcut to success for sure, Mike. You got that.
So how do you go find a mentor?
Plenty of different ways. Like I told you, I've been fortunate to always find mentorship. And when I asked one of the guys that mentored me early on, actually the first show we ever had on the Podcast Factory was the Making Agents Rich show. We did 193 of those. So this guy I'm good friends with, he was a mentor for me in my real estate business, even a mentor in my digital business. And I asked him, I said, Darren, what is it? Why do I always seem to find mentorship? I'm always surrounded by the coolest people. And his answer was elegant. It was simple. Here's what he said. Because you ask for it. Yeah. Like, okay, I asked for it. And the way to ask for it is not to be an annoying pest. Mentor me. That's not what I'm talking about. And that's not what Darren was talking about. But the way that I do it, and actually this is one of my secret podcast recipes, I call them, in my new book coming out, but it's the Guru Love Potion. Okay. And the way that this recipe works is you seek out the mentors who you want to get close to. Then you buy their products, take their training, then you use it. That's the hard part. Most people won't use it. And you report back your findings, whether it worked. Most of the time it's going to work. Whether you did awesome and you're able to share that and give them a testimonial, that is going to make gurus fall in love with you, because you're like their poster child when you do that. And so that's been my secret recipe to getting mentorship, is using what I learned from people, seeking them out, using what I learned from them, and showing them the results I got, which encourages them to invest more time in me.
Yeah, and that almost is almost the mandatory prerequisite. It's doing your due diligence, is putting your time in for you to get the audience with that mentor, that potential mentor, to even ask that question. From what I have seen, that a lot of people that have attained, they're ready and willing to give back, and not that they want to mentor 15 people, a day, but the point is they have their limits. But it is an opportunity that the mentor does receive some benefit, because they feel like they're pouring back into people that are coming up, and they feel like, hey, I've learned a lot, paid my dues. I now want to help the next person up the next rung.
Yeah, it's a worthy investment for them, because as you know, Mike, and anybody who does any kind of business training, coaching, anything like that, is a lot of people will seek out your advice and not do anything with it, which is so frustrating. I bang my head against the wall when that happens. But when you find someone who goes out, uses every little bit of information you give them and does something with it and turns into a great win for them, that's rewarding on both sides. Yeah.
So what do you do when you have someone that maybe it's not a formal mentor relationship, but someone that you're working with, and you just know this certain strategy or these certain 2 or 3 steps is something that's going to be very powerful for them, and they're not hard to do, and you lay it out for them, and they go running off going, yep, I can do it, and then crickets.
See, that is my frustration, and it's so difficult, right? It's just like, why bother? Why take the time to do that? And that's really why so many big people out there are jaded, because they help, they want to help, they're in a position to help, and when they try to help and you don't take action on it, it hurts. It's like, why bother? And so that's the way I feel. And what I try to do these days, this is going to sound a little funny, but I try to make my prices so expensive that they can't ignore my advice.
I think that's genius, and also it gets the tire kickers out of the way. I also think this, when you were describing that, I think that there is a certain element that when someone is given some advice and they think that they want to implement it, and you're going, are they going to do it? I'm rooting for them. I'm kind of, and you almost want to give them like a little lead-in, warm-up homework assignment before you give them the really good stuff. Because I think that old adage, knowledge is power, really is a fallacy, because it's the implementation of the knowledge that's the power. So
right.
Here's what I think that when we are looking at, principles for success, let's say, there are the mentality of what we just talked about, that people will hear something and never do something with it. That is so prevalent that if you want to succeed, all you need to do is implement a few things consistently, because you will then become so far beyond the other people out there, your competition, because they're hearing it and not implementing it, or maybe not even hearing it at all. So the fact that we're hearing something and implementing, just even nominally, because as Les Brown says, jump and grow your wings on the way down. Don't, kind of get that minimum viable product going and just kind of get stuff out there, and you then are perceived so much more powerfully because you're out there doing something. And I've heard that on these discussion forums or Facebook groups or whatever, 90-some% of all the people are lurkers. They just read and they never contribute. So if you do contribute yourself once in a while, you become seen as that higher end expert, because you're sticking your neck out there and actually contributing. So what are your thoughts on when you see people actually doing that implementation, and even on a small scale, they kind of get that confidence and momentum, then they do a little bit more, then they do a little bit bigger. Doesn't it kind of grow to the point that they almost can start convincing themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And that's it. It doesn't take a lot to stand out, because as you said, so few people, and we talk about the 80-20, but there's an 80-20 inside the 80-20. So there's only 4% of people really doing anything. That's why it's so easy to stand out. But most people have, and this is my problem with society today, is the idea of entitlement. They think that by thinking good thoughts and looking at pictures of stuff they want, it's going to fall in their lap. That is not it. That is not going to do it. What you have to do, get ready, brace yourself. You have to do work. And even if it's a little bit of work at a time, you have to do work if you want to get to your goals. You can't just sit there and think warm thoughts and hope things happen.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for days on that one topic right there and still be banging our heads against the wall. But I think the takeaway to that concept is, if we want to be successful and be seen as successful in a group of people, like, how can you stand out? We talk about competitive advantage. So what is your entrepreneurial competitive advantage? What is your company's brand, and how can you stand out? Well, sometimes it's just doing some of these things, at all, just doing them, and then doing them consistently, because probably your competitor is not doing them at all. And here's an example. I've got a client that is in the environmental remediation business, and they get large contracts, and they were told recently that their last bid was a little bit higher than the next competitor, but they appreciated the fact that when they had questions and they called in or emailed, that they were getting right back to them, and they knew that if they chose them, that during the job and during the project, that they would be, communicative and be able to, work with them well, whereas the other competitor might have had a lower bid, but they just kind of took their time getting back. So I think that whole concept of, having that sense of urgency is really, really powerful, and it's not hard to do, but people just don't do it.
Good for us.
Hey, so how about efficiencies, 4-hour work week, and getting things done, because now we're convinced that we have to implement some of these things. Well, then how do you get past the point of feeling like I have to do it all? There's only so many hours in the day, and we have to, get away from feeling overloaded so much.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this on some of your other shows, and definitely you need to have a team around you. And here's the problem today. Too many people have read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, and they don't realize that most of that's a fairy tale, and it takes years and years and years to get to that point. Yep. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble here. And so I laugh because in my real estate business, see, the Podcast Factory is my second business. I have a real estate business, and that's really where I have this concept of the 4-hour work week. Now, it's a great idea, this 4-hour work week. And frankly, if you love doing something, you're not going to want to do it for 4 hours. So I want to point that out. But I don't love necessarily doing all the stuff that goes with my real estate business. So that's why I've worked my way out of it. That 4-hour work week concept took me over 10 years to get to. And
it took you 10 years to be an overnight success.
That's right, Mike. It took 10 years to get the systems in place. And what I would say about systemizing and outsourcing and stuff, I say that, first of all, you have to start out and you have to learn the basics. You need a working knowledge of what's going on. And too many people start out and they think they're just going to outsource things. And fact is, you need a working knowledge. You need to figure out how to get the output that you're looking for, build a system around that, and then improve the system. And that's the thing most people also don't get, is that once you build it, it doesn't stay working. It's just like a car engine. It's going to need oil. It's going to need a tune-up. It's going to need a new air filter. So you're going to be monitoring that system, but get your first one up and running, get it spitting out the output that you're looking for in a consistent fashion, then do the next one, then do the next one. And each one, get them all working like little perfect machines. And as you figure things out, then you can bring somebody else to manage the machine for you. And the good part is when you bring on the right people, they might even make that machine better for you. And so I say that this stuff can be done, but it's not going to be the short picture that people think it is, where they're sitting on the beach with their butt in the sand and their toes in the water. That's just not the way it is. It's going to be work all the way there, and there's still going to be some maintenance, and you have to be ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's just the simple concept of, for the next 2 weeks, write down every single thing that you personally did as the CEO or as your job, and then look back and say, what are some of the things that were mundane that I could have offloaded to someone because my hourly rate is X, and I could pay someone much less to do this and then free me up to do the things that are the highest and best use of my time. So yeah, it's the mindset. It's not the end-all, be-all solution. So let's talk about entrepreneur, someone that is a business owner, entrepreneur, sales professional. Why a podcast? Why should they choose to go down that path as opposed to, well, I'm just going to blog, or I'm going to do, YouTube videos, or I'm going to do any myriad of things out there? What is why should people be considering setting up and running their own podcast?
Mike, your listeners are not going to like this. I have a bad reputation for talking people out of podcasting, and they're shocked. And look, I don't have sales pages on the website. I don't have many offers, and I definitely don't have my production services on there. And there's a simple reason for that, because a podcast isn't for everyone. People think that, and maybe not your listeners, most likely not your listeners, but there are people out there who think a podcast is a business. And I just smacked my head like, oh my God, a podcast is not a business. A podcast is a branch of a working business. And this is why I talk people out of podcasting. First, you have to have, and for me, the way I run things, even in my real estate, my database comes first. So my email list, my list of contacts, that's the first piece you need. And after you build your database of possible leads and prospects, then you have to build your database of customers. So those are things you need to do first before you do anything else. And then after that, you can start adding different things on there. And so you can add blogging, or you can add YouTube videos, or you can add a podcast. But this is the reason why I talk so many people out of podcasting, because they don't have their database in place. They don't have products for sale. They don't have a working business, and they think they're going to be able to do that all from a podcast. And I just don't believe that. In my experience, what I have seen, I've been doing podcasts since 2009, and I did it that way. That's how I know. I did 70 shows where I didn't make any money, and I just wasted a ton of time. I did another 30 shows on another run where I outsourced everything and ended up thousands of dollars in the hole. And I didn't get it right till I figured out my no money down podcast recipe, which was build a business first, then add a podcast to it.
Yeah, that's a really, really good, insightful point, is as anything, it takes work. So don't think that it's just talking into thin air and, followers and funds follow. And it kind of gets back to something you alluded to earlier. You hear of many of these gurus. I sent one email out to my email list and made $20,000. I can teach you how to do the same. Well, the problem is it took them 10 years to get the email list big enough and responsive enough to respond to some email, and Joe Schmo doesn't have that, and then he gets frustrated. So I think that you have to realize that it's an uphill battle, and what do you want out of that podcast? Do you want to create money from it, or do you want to create it, and correct if I'm wrong, there could be some podcasts that are strictly geared to client retention and educating and becoming an advocate for your clients, to where you are just maintaining your podcast, teaching them and going deeper, almost like a mastermind group, and you are just using it for that purpose alone. And that becomes a form of monetization.
And you said it there. And if you think about what you said, a retention tool, so you already have a business, a mastermind, so you already have an audience. I am a believer that a podcast is not the first thing that you do. And I think it's great. Like, if you're using it because you're strategically saying, I'm going to have a podcast where I'm going to interview people who are potential business partners. Yeah, well, there's going to be an aspect of that leads to business. Sure. But for the most part, I don't know if you listen to many podcast shows, but one of my favorite is I Love Marketing with Dean Jackson and Joe Polish.
Joe Polish,
I
do listen to that one.
Yes, excellent. So I was having coffee with Dean Jackson about a month ago, and we were talking podcasting. All of us there had podcasts, and we were just rapping a little bit about it. And Dean put it so simply, as he often does. He says, podcasts just suck for getting leads. We don't get many leads. And he's got a very big following. He's like, we don't get many leads from the podcast, but boy, does it convert. And so there it is. You have an audience already in place, and now you're using it as a tool to convert to paying customers. Totally makes sense.
It's like with anything, like the Simon Sinek books, it starts with why. You got to figure out what that why is. Why do you want that? And then work backwards. And I would say that there's plenty of business models, and you can insert webinars, podcasting, whatever the content marketing tool is. You still need to figure out why you want to do it, what the result and outcome is, to justify your time investment, because it might be a little bit of money too, but your time investment of even the learning curve, learning how to do some of these things, and then secondly, just getting it done. Doing the interviews of 20, 30 minutes each, that's time, but then there's prep time, there's after the interview time. So I think that is sage advice, which is, the podcast is not for everybody, but for the people that know what they want. And do you want it for a retention tool, for a branding tool, for a lead generation, or maybe even a lead, a sales cycle shortening tool? How about this one?
Yes.
I've got a meeting with someone next week. I email them and go, hey, looking forward to connecting about whatever that it is. In the meantime, listen to one of my recent episodes of my podcast, because you asked me the question of X, and on my last podcast here, I answered that. So enjoy this and look forward to talking to you next week. Well, now you're positioned so much differently than just Joe, the salesperson, meeting with them, and they probably are meeting with someone else. So who are they going to choose? The guy that has, some fancy brochures and a business card, or the guy that has his podcast and they listen to it and he seems to know what he's talking about?
I like the point you made there. And in fact, I have a client that I'm working with that we started talking, and he wanted to build a product, but then he didn't want to undermine his business. And what I like to do is I get on the phone and dive deep into what people have going on, so I could really understand what they're looking to do. And what you just said was the key. So his sales cycle was something like 6 to 9 months. And what we decided to do was not make a product that was for sale and undermining his business. We made a product that was a package that he would send FedEx to his targets. I'm calling them targets. That might not be the best word, but send them to these strategic people so that he could shrink that time, that buy time, so that he was the authority, that he presented himself in the best possible light so that they would want to reach out to him. So you were right on the money, Mike.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time. I always love it. It's like these interviews turn out to be more than just tell me about your background, tell me about your business. They turn into a bit like mastermind sessions. So I love that and love talking with you. So if anyone would like to learn more about you, what is the best way to connect with you?
Thank you for this opportunity. And I do enjoy it when it feels more like we're just having a chat and the listeners are a fly on the wall. So thank you for making that happen, because that's what excites me about podcasts. Cool. But we talked a little bit about a couple different podcast recipes that I use, and I put together something for the Business Innovators Radio listeners where they can get my top 10 podcast recipes, the stuff that I use to build my list, to make money, to build my brand for me and for my clients. And they can go to thepodcastfactory.com/business, just like Business Innovators Radio. So thepodcastfactory.com/business. They can grab my top 10 podcast recipes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing more from you down the road.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.